Well, good morning, everyone. And good morning, at least from Camp Mulgara. Good morning to those who are watching this video a little later. Well, we're down now to the last day of the feast, the last great day. And we're down to part 3 of the 7 trumpets. And this will be a bit longer today because we're dealing with trumpet 6 and trumpet 7. So if I see you all flagging about halfway through, we'll pause and I'll invite you all to stand and stretch. And then be seated again. And that's right, as Tony says, if you're feeling a little down, just stand, stretch and sit while I'm speaking. I won't be offended. All right, well, let's bow our heads and we'll ask the Lord to send His Spirit to be with us. Father in heaven, we thank you again, Father, for the wonderful blessings of this Passover time. And Father, we just thank you that you've given us a more sure word of prophecy, and as we spend some time now on this 6th and 7th trumpets, Father, I just pray that our faith will be reinforced as we see just how reliable is your more sure word of prophecy. Father, I just pray for your Spirit to be with us. We know your Spirit is poured out in great abundance on this day. And I pray that, Father, each of us will reach out by faith to receive the blessings, that your Spirit will shut out the world from us. Grant us wisdom and understanding as we study these things, Father, I ask in the name of Jesus. Amen. So yesterday we finished the conclusion of the 5th seal, which ended 150 years of the torment from the Ottoman Empire. And the 5th seal, we understand, ended in 1449 AD. And at the end of it, the angel announced, one woe is past, and behold, there come two woes more hereafter. So we saw that the first woe, the 5th trumpet, continued from the rise of the Mohammedanism with the appearance of Muhammad on the scene to the end of, and that was 606 AD, to the end of the 5 months of the 150 years of torment. We saw it ended in 1449. But there was no relief because the second woe was to follow hereafter. And the second woe is the 6th trumpet, and so let's have a look at that. So now Revelation 9 and verse 13. And the 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the 6th angel which had the trumpet, loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, and a day, and a month, and a year, for to slay the 3rd part of men. So here is a woe that is of far worse effect than the previous. The first woe, remember, was limited to torment. Torment men for 5 months. But under this woe, that restraint is removed. It's interesting, this is what Stephen Haskell had to say about this. It's a very interesting point he makes. This is from the story of the Seer of Patmos, page 174. He says the 150 years of torment, not destruction, was about to close. One woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter. The restraining hand of God had held contending forces in check, waiting until the extreme limit of time for men to acknowledge the righteousness of Jehovah. Now remember, we are speaking here of the Eastern Roman Empire, and nominally, what religion was it? Christian. So let's remind ourselves the history leading up to the sixth trumpet. Remember, we talked yesterday that the Emperor John VIII, Palaeologos, died in October 1448, leaving no children. His brother Constantine XI, was favoured to succeed him, but Constantine first humbly sought consent from the Ottoman Sultan, Murad II, who graciously agreed. In bowing to the Sultan of Turkey, the Eastern Empire acknowledged that their independence was at an end, albeit they still had control of Constantinople. The authority and supremacy of the Turkish power was thereby acknowledged, because Constantine XI virtually said, "I cannot reign unless you first allow it." And Murad accepted the request in December of 1448, and Constantine, he wasn't in Constantinople. So you can see Constantinople, now Istanbul it is now, it's got a circle around it. The red dot is where Constantine Palaeologos, if I can say it correctly, he was there at this time. That was one of their outposts which they still controlled. So then he was inaugurated there, and we'll talk about that a little later, a little bit of politics about that. He then travelled by ship to Constantinople, and he arrived in Constantinople on the 12th of March 1449. So he was there just a short time before the 150 years expired. So let's get back to the prophecy. We saw verse 14, "Loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates." Who or what is represented by the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates? Right, we saw back in verse 11 yesterday, an angel in prophecy represents what?
Messenger.
Chief messenger, leader, king.
Contextually, you can decide which one's more appropriate.
That's right.
That's what you were trying to say yesterday.
That's right.
Are these the four angels that are holding back Williams and Strong?
No, these are not. No, these are not. No, these are four leaders of some type. So an angel represents a chief spokesman, a leader, chief messenger in the case of the seven churches. Because remember, the letters were sent to each of the seven churches. Who was it sent to? The leader of the church, the angel of the church. So this has been interpreted to mean the four nations or sultanies in the region of the Euphrates River. Now, Joshua Himes explained extremely well in the Signs of the Times, May 1, 1840. We'll have a look at this. The four angels were the four sultanies of the Turks before their organising into one empire, the capitals of which were Baghdad, Damascus, Aleppo and Iconium. These sultanies were bound to their several localities or territories near the river Euphrates for a long time through the instrumentality of the Crusades. But when these wars ceased and Syria and Egypt were abandoned by the Christians at the latter end of the 13th century, then the four angels or sultanies near the river Euphrates were loosed. Ortogrul, dying in the year 1288, was succeeded by his son Othman, who in the year 1299 founded a new empire composed of the remains of the four Turkish sultanies, called to this day the Ottoman Empire. So there we have the explanation of what the prophecy is telling us. 4 angels. Loose the 4 angels which were bound in the great river Euphrates. And they formed together to become the Ottoman Empire, under Othman, who was the first Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. And the next verse said, and the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour. Notice I have an in green, so there's a very good reason for this, we'll see in a moment. They were prepared for an hour, and a day, and a month, and a year, for to slay the third part of men. We have here a prophetic time period, do we not? Looks just like it, doesn't it? An hour and a day and a month and a year. How does this calculate out? Well, first let me tell you, this is a hotly disputed point, because the idea has been put forward, and many of the modern translations have this idea. The word "an" is replaced with "the," the definite article. And so these people say it's interpreted to mean that God will release demonic forces to do their work in the future on the hour and day and month and year that he has nominated. Right? So this is a very different understanding. King James says an hour and a day and a month and a year. Looks like a day of atonement. If it's the hour and day and month and year, you're saying? When I found the Grace Amadon articles in the Ministry magazine of June and July of 1944, there's another article in there, and I'm waiting to get the second part of it from July, but it deals with the reason why it is correctly translated as an hour and a day and not the hour. So here's an example. Revised version. The hour and day and month and year, as opposed to an hour and a day and a month and a year. Now, did I quote? Yes, I did. Anyone else ever seen this book? You might remember a little while ago, the book of Revelation was the subject of our lesson quarterlies. Remember that? That was the textbook that was recommended to go with it. I have it. I bought it quite a few years ago at the ABC at camp by Ranko Stefanovic, a professor from Andrews, I believe. Very intelligent man. However, this is what he said in this book. The second thing to observe is that the demonic forces have no freedom to act. So this is taking this idea, the demonic forces will be released. They have no freedom to act until the time set for them by God. The 4 angels are said to have been prepared for the hour and day and month and year. This can be understood as a divinely appointed moment in time. If, in fact, the Greek is properly interpreted as the hour and month, and that's quite a reasonable outcome. But, as I said, linguistic study back in 1944 was supporting the King James translation. So that's something to be aware of if you haven't come across this. You need to know this is another undermining of the prophetic faith of our fathers. All right, so our time period, working on the year-day principle, an hour, we will go on the King James translation, we'll go on our Pioneer's understanding, an hour and a day and a month and a year. Right, 1 year. Prophetic year is 360 days. Translates to 360 years. Plus 1 month. Prophetic month is 30 days. How do you know?
You read it in that verse yesterday.
We read in that verse yesterday, which was what? From the flood. The record of the flood.
Genesis 7.
That's it.
391.
So we had another day.
I don't know.
1 year. 1 day, 1 year. And one prophetic hour. 1/24 of 360 days prophetic, 15 days literal. What's that add up to? 391 years and 15 days. Is this a very specific time period we're speaking of?
Yes.
Yes.
This is extremely precise. And because I put to you, because it is so precise, it is so hotly disputed. So if we thought 27 July 1299 was hot water, and it is, we are entering into a boiling cauldron and tackling this one and having the courage to stand in the prophetic faith of our spiritual fathers. Very, very few, sadly, in Adventism, I think, still accept this. Well, we don't hear it preached anymore. Yes, Talia?
Is this, like hour, day, like year, mentioned anywhere else in Revelation?
No, it relates just to this. So, understanding year-day principle, we calculate it out. Yep.
And what we do understand is that our forefathers, the SCA pioneers, they were able to actually precisely name the day and the hour.
We'll get there. Exactly. And this will thrill your hearts. Thank you, Judy. You're right onto it.
She's running ahead.
She is. She's so excited about this. Wonderful. We'll get there in a moment. So what's this time period do? What's it say? What did the verse say?
4 angels are loose.
They're loose, right? Prepared for an hour, 391 years and 15 days. For what purpose? So at the end of an hour, a day, a month and a year, what happens?
Killing.
At the end of it, it stops. They no longer have this power to slay as they did previously. And this is the hottest point in all of Revelation, I think. So this is a prophetic time allotted to the Ottoman Empire, with the restriction applied under the fifth trumpet to torment only, now lifted. This one says slay. Previous one said torment, this says slay. So the restriction is lifted. And as Stephen Haskell said, the restraining power of God had held back the destructive forces, but when the Eastern Empire did not acknowledge the righteousness of God, when the Eastern Empire said, as did the antediluvians, depart from us, what can the Almighty do for them? Here it is in Job, which said unto God, speaking of the antediluvians, depart from us, and what can the Almighty do? Now this is, I've not seen anyone actually else say this, it's a big statement to say that effectively the East Empire was saying to God, depart from us. Our studies on the character of God leave me with no option to make this stand, because we understand our Father does not willingly give up his children. He doesn't. But he does finally give them the desires of their heart. As he did the antediluvians, depart from us. So in grief, he departed. He withdrew his spirit. So he gives people the desires of their heart when they refuse to acknowledge the righteousness of Jehovah, using Stephen Haskell's words. So, is there evidence of such refusal at the end of the fifth trumpet? Ever seen anything presented on this? I found this quite fascinating. I went digging for this. Look, let's have a look at this. Well, yes, there is. And here's evidence from a Wikipedia article entitled Constantine 11 Paleologos. So let's have a read of this. This is quite fascinating if you don't know this history. So this is Constantine's brother John, Eastern Emperor John the 8th Paleologos, left for Italy in November of 1473. 1437. I'm very dyslexic here this morning. To attend the Council of Ferrara in an effort to unite the Eastern and Western churches. Although many in the Byzantine Empire opposed the union of the churches, as it would mean religious submission under the papacy, John viewed such a union as necessary. The papacy did not view the situation of the Christians in the East as something positive, but would not call for any aid to disintegrating empire if it did not acknowledge obedience to the Catholic Church and renounce what Catholics perceived as errors. John brought a large delegation to Italy, including Joseph II, the Patriarch of Constantinople, representatives of the Patriarchs of Alexandria and Jerusalem, large numbers of bishops, monks and priests, and his younger brother Demetrius. In June 439, the Council of Florence, and this council got moved, if I remember the history of it, the Council of Florence in Italy declared that the churches had been reunited. John returned to Constantinople on 1st of February 1440. Although he was received in a grand ceremony organised by Constantine and Demetrius, who had returned some time earlier, the news of the unification stirred a wave of resentment and bitterness among the general populace. Now, 26 is a reference to that statement in the Wikipedia article, who felt that John had betrayed their faith and their worldview. Another reference. Many feared the union would arouse suspicion among the Ottomans. Constantine agreed with his brother's views on the union. If a sacrifice of the independence of their church resulted in the Westerners organising a crusade and saving Constantinople, it would not have been in vain. So when Constantine, the last emperor of the Eastern Empire, became emperor upon the death of his brother John, what were his views on unification? Both Constantine and the Patriarch of Constantinople, Gregory III, so this is a little bit later, Gregory III Mammas, were supporters of the union of the churches. A ceremony in which Gregory crowned Constantine emperor might have led to the anti-unionists in the capital to rebel. Constantine's rise to emperor was controversial. Although he was accepted on account of his lineage with few alternative candidates, his lack of a full coronation and support for the union of the churches damaged public perception of the new emperor. He basically crowned himself, I think I recall reading. So, very political. Careful not to anger the anti-unionists through being crowned by Gregory III, Constantine believed that his proclamation at Mistras had sufficed as an imperial coronation, so basically crowned himself, and had given him all the constitutional rights of the one true emperor. In his earliest known imperial document, a crucible from February 1449, he refers to himself as Constantine Paleologos in Christ, true emperor and autocrat of the Romans. So it seems quite clear. The leadership of the Eastern Empire, both civil and spiritual, emperor and the patriarch, committed to unification with the Roman Catholic Church despite knowing they would be required to renounce doctrines they held that Rome regarded as heresy, in particular that the Orthodox Church rejected papal primacy. The point is that Constantine XI, last emperor of the Eastern Empire, looked to Rome for salvation and rather than the God of heaven, which said unto God, "Depart from us." And what can the Almighty do? Fair case? Now, why was the Ottoman Empire, we just saw this a moment ago, why was the Ottoman Empire allotted 391 years and 15 days? For to slay the third part of men. So having rejected the protection of God, the Eastern Empire, the last third of the Roman Empire, the last third of men of the empire would be slain both politically and with great loss of human life, including the loss of Constantine, who died in the battle. He refused to surrender. He led one last charge into the oncoming Ottomans and was killed in that final conflict. When Constantinople fell, the third part, the last part by division of the Roman Empire, existed no more as a political entity. The Ottomans went on to conquer much of the area that was once part of the Roman Empire. They also killed hundreds of thousands of Shia Muslims. This is from an article on Wikipedia. In response to the growth of Shiism, the Ottoman Empire killed Shias in Anatolia. Hundreds of thousands of Shias were killed in the Ottoman Empire, including Alevis in Turkey, the Alawiras in Syria, and the Shia of Lebanon.
Is that related to Shia Muslims?
That's exactly it. So that conflict we see from time to time over there has a lot of history. I didn't understand that.
Jim Arabito used to get right into this perspective of the Shia Muslims conflict in the Middle East.
Yeah. So here's some comparison maps, just to give you an idea of what's going on here. So this one shows the extent of the Ottoman Empire at the close of the fifth trumpet in 1449. Right, so the red is what they controlled in 1449. Now this one shows, so I got that red from the first map and I imposed it on this one. So this shows a comparison between the Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire. So the Roman Empire at its peak, Ottoman Empire at its peak. So you can see great amounts of it.
So the green is unread from here?
The green is directly administered territory. The light green is vassal and autonomous territory. The shaded is territory lost before 1683. Vassal territory. There's a bit of information in there that was lost to the. So at the peak of the Ottoman Empire, all of what's green in various shades, including the red in the middle, was theirs.
So the green is the Ottoman Empire?
Yes.
Right, yeah.
All of the green is Roman, all of the green is Ottoman, all of the red is Roman. Right, just a comparison for what we're talking about. Right, back to our prophecy. And the number of the army of the horsemen, this is the Ottoman horsemen, were 200,000, and I heard the number of them. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them having breastplates of fire, and of I don't know how you say that one. There's jacinth or jacinth, and brimstone. And the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. So these two verses, in the best way that John can describe it, is expressing the deadly effect of the new mode of warfare that's introduced here. It was by the use of gunpowder in firearms and in cannon, and particularly cannon, that Constantinople was finally overcome in 1453. The son of Murad II, Mehmet, commissioned a huge, specially made brass cannon that was used to fire massive cannonballs weighing about 600 pounds or 270 kilos into the previously impregnable walls of Constantinople, breaking them down and opening the way for the Ottoman forces to take the city. Otherwise they couldn't take the city, the walls were too strong. Now the taking of Constantinople is just the beginning of the second woe. Prophecy foretold that this woe was last for 391 years and 15 days. Now we have a very definite starting point given to us for the commencement of the 150 years. Remember that? 27th of July, 1299. Remember I said that was a hotly disputed date? We saw that Grace Amadon had 3 lines of very compelling argument as to why that was a valid date and we should be able to rely on it. So we have a very definite starting point of the 150 years of torment under the first woe, 27th of July, 1299. We add 150 years to that, and where do we land? 27th of July, 1449. Why is it not the 26th of July, I hear you asking?
Why is it?
Why is it 27th? Isn't that 150 years in one day? No, it's not. Why not? Because it didn't start at the very beginning of the 27th. If it starts partway through the 27th, when's it got to finish? Partway through the 27th. This is the same thing with 1843, 1844. If you're working just on years, you'll land on 1843. But if you understand 22nd of October of the beginning year, it's got to be 22nd of October, 1844. You often hear people say, oh, it's a 0 year. No, it's not. It's because they started partway through a year. They've got to finish partway through the following year. So, John heard the number of a very large army. Got that there? 200,000. How many is that? 2 times 10 to the 5th plus 10 to the 3rd, 2 times 10 to the 8th is what? 200 million. 200 million. 200 million.
That's a lot of horsemen.
So is that at one time, or was that over a period of time?
Well, it's interesting. It could actually read as 2 myriads of myriads in the Greek. Either way, it was a vast army. Gibbon wrote that the myriads of Turkish horsemen overspread a frontier of 600 miles. So there's a lot of them. John describes the cavalrymen as best he can because he had no knowledge or any way of knowing about gunpowder and the ways of warfare that would be used over 1,300 years after he had viewed this vision. The discharge of firearms by the Ottoman cavalry had the appearance of fire, smoke and brimstone coming from the mouths of the horses. It's because historians say the Turkish cavalry held their rifle adjacent to the horse's mouth and fired. So it would look like, coming from the horse's mouth, fire, smoke and brimstone. All right, let's move on. Verse 18. By these 3 was the 3rd part of men killed. And by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone. These are the 3. Fire, smoke and brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. So John's trying to describe what was becoming modern warfare, the use of gunpowder. For their power is in their mouth, and that's where he's seeing it coming from. And in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents and had heads, and with them they do hurt. And as I said, Mehmet had a massive cannon built, and it was behind the army tail, firing these massive projectiles over and into the walls. So John, looking at it, you can understand why he's described it like this. So Constantinople fell. Constantine XI was killed, and politically the Eastern Roman Empire was no more. So we have 150 years, beginning on the 27th of July 1299, bringing us down to 27th of July 1449. There's no actual event I can discover on the 27th of July 1449. It's simply they were given power to torment for 150 years. So we must go to the end of 150 years, no more power to torment. Why not? Because that restraint was lifted immediately. And this is what the Greek word tells us, chapter 9, verse 12. One woe is past, behold, there come two more woes hereafter. So this is what we were told at the end of the fifth trumpet. Two more woes hereafter. 150 years finished, another woe hereafter. There are two Greek words translated with the one word hereafter. The meaning is that the next woe follows immediately after the first. So let's do our maths. 27th of July 1299 plus 150 years equals 27th July 1449. 27th July 1449 plus 391 years equals 27th of July 1840. 27th of July 1840 plus 15 days equals 11th of August 1840. The most hotly disputed date, I believe, in Adventism, barring none. So we would expect then some indication on the 11th of August 1840 that the power of the Ottomans to slay the third part of men had come to an end, wouldn't we?
That's right.
Do we have this evidence?
Yes. Story.
All right, let's have a look, work our way through this. Now, Josiah Litch, Signs of the Times, August 1, 1840. 10 days before, the 11th of August, August 1, 1840. Allowing for the first period, 150 years, to have been exactly fulfilled before. Now he uses the name here, I'd look this up, because he's saying this person, Decozes, ascended the throne by permission of the Turks. Now we know it was Constantine, so I looked it up, yes. It's possibly a misspelling. It appears that his other name is that, also known as Constantine the 11th. So we're talking about the same person. I had to satisfy myself about that. So, ascended the throne by permission of the Turks, and that 391 years, 15 days, commenced at the close of the first period. It will end in the 11th of August 1840, when the Ottoman power in Constantinople may be expected to be broken, and this, I believe, will be found to be the case. So this is from Signs of the Times, August 1, 1840, by Josiah Litch. Now there is a very confident and powerful and hotly disputed statement made by Josiah Litch. I think he actually recanted on this later. All right, so what happened? So a bit of history in here. So in 1838, the Turks suppressed a rebellion by Egypt. Remember that map before? Egypt was green. But in the following year, the Egyptians again attacked the Turks, decimating its army and capturing its naval fleet when the naval commanders defected to Egypt. To maintain stability in the region, England, Russia, Austria, Prussia, 4 great Christian powers stepped in. The Sultan of Turkey accepted their help and signed a document that effectively placed his dominion into the hands of the 4 powers in the event of a war with Egypt. So when was this going to happen? If there was a war with Egypt. An ultimatum was given to the Pasha of Egypt. Remember, Egypt had no pharaohs for a very long time. The leader of Egypt was called Pasha. An ultimatum was given to the Pasha of Egypt that effectively took control of Turkey out of the hands of the Sultan and into the hands of the great powers. So he was given an ultimatum, which effectively was the 4 Christian powers giving him the ultimatum, or backing Turkey with it. Now, according to a letter with the place and date Constantinople, August 27, 1840, was published in the London Morning Chronicle on September 18, 1840. And according to this article, the ultimatum was communicated to the Pasha on the 11th of August 1840. Now, I use the word communicated. I've looked at this very, very hard. A number of pioneers have said he was given the ultimatum on the 11th of August. And this gives rise, those sort of statements give rise to the opposition, and it has some credibility to it. But we need to just look in the totality of what happened. So as I said, if the date 27th of July 1299 is hotly disputed, and Revelation 9:15 the hour is hotly disputed, it pales into insignificance in comparison to the massive attacks on the date 11 August 1840, because this is the date that proved the year-day principle. Now, those attacking and rejecting this date, including, sadly, W.W. Prescott, W.A. Spicer, all say there is no evidence that the Pasha of Egypt was given the ultimatum on the 11th of August, but it happened a few days later on the 16th of August. And I believe they are correct. And this is what I was confronted with when I was researching this. Massive conflict over 27 July 1299. Couldn't find a way through. Then this, and so I just turned this over to my Father in heaven. And the first thought that came to my mind was, what does the prophecy actually say? Does the prophecy require the ultimatum to be handed to the Pasha on the 11th? Well, of course it does not. It simply says the power came to an end. All we're looking for is evidence that the power came to an end. There is some acknowledgement of that. It doesn't require a piece of paper changing hands to necessarily do that. The prophecy simply allots a time to the Ottoman Empire. All right, so let's have a closer look at this report in the London Morning Chronicle. The paper had a correspondent in Constantinople. So these letters that are going to England and being published subsequently, almost like a month later, is coming from Constantinople by ship to England, then published in the London Morning Chronicle. There's a small detail that appears to have been overlooked. I hesitate to say ignored, but at least overlooked by these critics. Right, here is the September 18 report. I've actually got clippings of the actual newspaper, but it's really hard to read. So this is a transcript. I know it's a correct transcript because I checked this against the clipping from the paper and I'm satisfied that this is a correct transcript. So, by the French steamer of the 24th, this is this letter dated, go back to my notes. So this was the letter dated Constantinople, August 27 of 1840. This is extract from that letter. And this is the one that's always quoted to say, this is evidence that the Pasha received the piece of paper, the ultimatum. So, by the French steamer of the 24th, we have advices from Egypt to the 16th. So this is a steamer, I think, that's gone to England. This is back to Constantinople. So this is the correspondent from Constantinople writing this. So the French steamer of the 24th, we have advices from Egypt to the 16th. So he knows what's happened in Egypt up to the 16th, because that was when this advice was sent to him in Constantinople on the 24th. They show no alteration in the resolution of the Pasha. Confiding in the valour of his Arab army and in the strength of the fortifications which defend his capital, he seems determined to abide by the last alternative, which means fight. And his recourse to this, therefore, is now inevitable. So all hope may be considered as at an end of a termination of the affair without bloodshed. So the correspondent believes this is going to end in bloodshed. It's going to be the four great Christian powers v. Egypt. Then he says, immediately on the arrival of the Cyclops steamer with the news of the convention of the four powers, Muhammad Ali, he's the Pasha, it is stated, quitted Alexandria. Now the critics pounce on this. You say, no, he wasn't there when the ship arrived. Quitted Alexandria to make a short tour through Lower Egypt, the object of absenting himself at such a moment being what reason? Partly to avoid conferences with the European consuls. Not with the Turks, with the Europeans. But principally to endeavour by his own presence to arouse the fanaticism of Bedouin tribes to facilitate the raising of his new levy. So he needed money to fight. So he's gone down to the Bedouin tribes to stir them up so they'll give him plenty of money. During the interval of his absence, the Turkish government steamer, which had reached Alexandria on the 11th, right, so it arrived on the 11th, and Muhammad Ali departed Alexandria on the 11th. And everyone pounced on that and say, see, he wasn't there. Which had reached Alexandria on the 11th with the envoy Rifat Bey on board. If you search him on the internet, particularly on Wikipedia, he was a poet of some note, this Rifat Bey. Just a young man. So Rifat Bey on board had been, by his orders, placed in quarantine. Here's the Pasha's orders, placed in quarantine, and she was not released from it until the 16th. All right, so you're starting to see a few problems piling up here. Now, this is still the same article. Previous, however, and this is what people seem to overlook. Previous, however, to the Pasha's leaving, and on the very day which he had been admitted to Pratik. Does anyone know what that means? That's the process of going through quarantine to get a clean bill of health. So what day was he put into quarantine? The 11th. On the very day on which he had been admitted to quarantine, the above-named functionary, Rifat Bey, had an audience with the Pasha and had communicated to him the command of the Sultan, which was what was in the ultimatum. This tells me that on the 11th of August 1840, the Pasha of Egypt knew the contents of the ultimatum, or being not having had a piece of paper physically put in his hand. Is that how you would also read this?
Yes.
Why can others not read this the same way? What's so hard about this? And had an audience with the Pasha and had communicated to him the command of the Sultan with respect to the evacuation of the Syrian provinces. These are the demands. That is returning of the navy. There's a bunch of things. Appointing another audience who was going to speak to him the next day when in the presence of the consuls of the four European powers. So why did the Pasha, what was one of the reasons for the Pasha going south in Egypt? To avoid a consultation with the Europeans. So it had been arranged on the 11th to have this consultation on the 12th. Muhammad Ali decided to go on tour. He would receive from him his definite answer and inform him of the alternative of his refusing to obey, giving him the 10 days which had been allotted him by the convention to decide on the course he should think fit to adopt. Right, so the Pasha has 10 days to make up his mind. All right, so it seems from reading that we would interpret that the Pasha did not actually have the document put in his hands, but he definitely did, on the 11th of August, according to this correspondent, understand and was told the contents. So he knew, and he knew about the 10 days. Yes, Dad?
But didn't it say he didn't even have the money to fight anymore?
Yeah, that's why he was going south to raise taxes, so he could fight. So the September 18 article, I believe, is telling anyone who can read that before the Pasha left on his tour of Lower Egypt, he granted an audience to Rifat Bey before the ship had to go into quarantine, Pratik. And in that audience, the Pasha was told of the ultimatum, and this happened on the 11th of August, 1840. Pasha may not have physically received that document on the day, But at the very least, he was well aware of the contents. He then put the ship in quarantine and left on his tour, partly to avoid conferences with the European powers. He didn't want to talk to them. So this shows the Pasha recognised, who was he avoiding? The Europeans. The Pasha recognised that the power was now at the four nations and the power of the Turks was gone, isn't it?
Yes.
Why else would he not want to talk to the Europeans? He's recognised. So here's one witness. In the mouth of how many witnesses do we need for a thing to be established? 2 or 3. All right, here's one. So we need a second one. Is there a second one? We've never really heard this before, but in fact there is. There is a second witness. So this is the extract from the Morning Chronicle, London Morning Chronicle, September 3, 1840. This article from Turkey, Constantinople, August what date?
12.
August 12. Okay, so this is the day after. This, what I've circled, is part of the article. Not the easiest to read. So we'll take that into print. Checked it to make sure it says what it says, and it does. So it's here. Alright, so this is part of this article. So what's happening is,
Sorry, who's the author of the article?
this is the correspondent in Constantinople. So he's written this on August 12. He sent it to England, and it's now published in the London Morning Chronicle, September 3rd, 1840. Written and sent from Constantinople on August 12. Okay? So this is the day after the 11th. Alright, so this is what it says. So the manner, however, of applying, see that? That's where we start. The manner, however, of applying the force. Now, the Sultan had asked the four powers, the representatives, the consuls of the four powers in Constantinople, what happens if the Pasha refuses? What are you going to do? Reasonable question? Okay, this is what we're now talking about. The manner, however, of applying the force, should he refuse to comply with these terms, whether a simple blockade is to be established on the coast, or whether his capital is to be bombarded and his enemies attacked in the Syrian provinces, is the point which still remains to be learned. Now, nor does, this is the important thing, nor does a note delivered yesterday by the four ambassadors in answer to the question put then by the Porte, had looked that one up, the Ottoman central government, I don't know why they use different words, as to the plan to be adopted in such an event, throw the least light on this subject. Now let's just go back to this first of all. So the note delivered yesterday. So this was written on the 12th, when's yesterday?
11th of August.
The 11th of August in Constantinople, okay? Now, go down to the blue at the bottom. This note simply states that provision has been made and there is no necessity for the Divan, the Ottoman State Council, alarming itself about any contingency that might afterward arise. So what's happened? What are the four powers said to the Sultan?
We have to think that
You don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Not your problem. Don't worry about it. What's that tell us?
that they knew what was happening on the 11th of August.
So yesterday, the 11th of August, report was the 12th. So what therefore was the date before yesterday, 11th, we got this, so it's clear this is the 11th. So on the 11th of August, yep. Okay.
Move across without a screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I'll try not to move across. I just
Yeah, read that, yeah.
yeah, I keep forgetting. Sorry, it's not a wide-angle lens. Sorry, online, I keep getting raptured away from you. So on the 11th of August, so after the Sultan, in his own capital, applied to the ambassadors of the four powers to know the measures which were to be taken in reference to a circumstance vitally important to his empire. He wanted to know what would happen. He was simply told provision had been made. He could not know what it was. He need give himself no alarm about it. He need give himself no alarm about any contingency that might arise afterward. So from that time, the four powers, England, Russia, Austria, Prussia, not the Sultan, not his cabinet, not the state council, but the four powers, they were going to manage it. In anyone's language, this is saying that Turkey's supremacy was gone, and it was gone on 11th of August 1840. Would you agree? Just as prophesied. Right to the day. 2 witnesses I put to you. 2 witnesses. In the mouth of 2 witnesses shall a thing be established. Have we established it?
Yes.
Do we have a more sure word of prophecy? Absolutely.
And not only that, but it established the day for year principle, which was going to be very handy soon.
That's right. And that's right. That's right. It established the year-day principle.
I think Pastor George Burnside used to really push this and printed out little tracts to show how powerful this prophecy really was.
That's right. That's right. And not surprisingly, that's why it's come under such massive attack.
Well, it gave impetus to the next prophecy.
That's right. It did. It did. It was a launching pad for the next prophecy.
My question is, where do we start counting? You know, the 361 years, and like Talia said, is this going to be applicable to us?
You mean a second application?
Yeah, there's no second application, be sure of that. Yeah.
There's a third woe yet to come.
Oh, there's a third woe yet to come.
Prophecy is still going to be applicable to the third woe that's coming.
This is only the second woe.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is only in the second woe. Second woe has now come to an end, 11th of August 1840. Second woe is finished. Yes, there is a third, and I put to you, worst woe yet to come. The worst of all woes is yet to come. Right, let's just finish off this first of all. So we've got the Sultan acknowledging that he cannot have government other than with the support of these 4 Christian powers. Do you remember the 5th woe, what Robert Whelan had said when we talked about John Palaiologos seeking the permission of the Sultan that he could reign? We said history, he said that's a very important point. History repeats. Just as the Ottomans rose to power with the Eastern Empire submitting to its authority, how does it end? The Ottoman power submitting to the authority of others.
You're talking about Daniel,
I'm talking about,
the king of the north, in the end.
no, I'm talking about this prophecy.
This one.
The 5th trumpet, the end of the Eastern Empire, Constantine the 11th, Palaiologos. To reign, he sought the permission of the Sultan. He acknowledged he could not reign without the permission of the Sultan. They went, their empires down, Eastern empires down, Ottoman empires got the authority. Here we are now, at the end of the Ottoman Empire reign, 391 years, 15 days, well, after from the end of the 150 years. This happened just before that. But the point is, history repeats. Just as the Ottomans came to power, with the previous power submitting to it,
Which was a Christian power.
which was a Christian power. Yeah, that's right, that's the other thing. It was a Christian power, so Christian power submitted to the Ottoman power. We now have Ottoman power submitting to Christian power.
What goes around?
That's what the point Robert Whelan is making. Most people miss that, but it's an interesting point, isn't it? History repeats. How many times did Mrs. White say that in the prophecy? In the spirit of prophecy. History repeats. History repeats.
Not in time, but in principle.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Some people get all excited and start to reapply.
Oh, yeah. You can't, it's not about reapplication of prophecy by any means. Nothing like that at all. It's saying history repeats. The sorts of things that happen again and happen again and happen again. All right, let's get back to our prophecy. Some sad words. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of their works, of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils, and idols of gold, and silver, and brass, and stone, and of wood, which neither can see, nor hear, nor work. Or walk. So after this woe, men have still not come to repentance. Sad words. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, we won't go into that one, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts.
So you didn't want to go into that one because that word sorcery is there. It's the same as here.
Yeah, fun. Yeah.
They started way back then.
Leads you to wonder, doesn't it? Robert Whelan summed this up very well. So this is in the Gospel and Revelation. Although the hordes of Muslims were let loose on the apostate Christian world, people refused to learn the lesson of repentance. European history during the time of the sixth trumpet, I think it should be, is an almost unbroken record of vanity, arrogance, pride and cruelty. Thus we see that God permits woes to come upon the world to bring sinners to their senses and to lead them to respond to the gospel. Woe after woe comes, yet still they love their sin. All right, so let's just recap before we move to the seventh trumpet. Revelation 8, 6 to 13 was the first four trumpets, the fall of the Western Roman Empire. That's where we started this journey. Revelation 9, we saw the fifth and sixth trumpet, the first and second woe, the fall of the Eastern Empire, the rise of the Ottoman Empire. We saw the rise from Muhammad through to Othman, who was their first king. We saw 150 years of restricted power, torment only. We saw 391 years and 15 days of supremacy. We saw loss of supremacy, existence by sufferance of the great powers. That's what we saw, wasn't it? They existed by the sufferance of the great powers, the loss of supremacy, 11th of August, 1840, recognised on the 11th of August, 1840. I mean, there were lots of other things happening around that which the critics look at and say, oh, what about this, what about this, what about this? The point is, at the end of 391 years and 15 days of supremacy, there is evidence that both the Turks, Egyptians and the Christian powers all recognised that the power of the Ottomans to slay the third part of men was gone. We saw that despite all this, the apostate Christian world did not repent and turn to God. And because of that, God is unable to protect an apostate sinful world from the woes they have brought upon themselves by their sins. He is therefore unable to protect them from the woe that is about to come. Yes, you want a little break at the moment? We've got a bit more to go yet. So.
You've got the rest of that slide coming?
That's it for this slide.
Oh, that's it for this slide.
Yeah, we've got some more coming because I want to deal quickly with just a thumb sketch of chapter 10, chapter 11, first part of chapter 11 leading up to the beginning of the seventh trumpet. So yes, take a few moments, just stand, stretch. Yeah, let's keep it running. Yeah, remember we've got the video running, so don't go too far. We'll just give it a moment or two and then we'll come back to it.
So just quickly,